Do you ever find yourself sitting quietly, wondering why your children no longer call or visit as often? You gave them everything, your love, your time, your sacrifices, and now they seem distant. The silence is heavy, isn't it? But here's the real question. Is it truly their fault? Or is there something else going on that we've ignored for far too long? Stay with me, because today we're not just talking about the pain of being overlooked. We're uncovering a deeper truth, one that may surprise you and change how you see the situation forever. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what to do next, without anger, guilt, or regret. In moments like these, it's natural to ask, where did I go wrong? The people you once cradled in your arms now feel like strangers. You start replaying old memories, the bedtime stories, the birthday parties, the sacrifices you made, wondering why they no longer seem to care. But here's something few people dare to say. Sometimes it's not about what you did wrong. It's about the silent expectations we build over time, expectations we never talk about but feel deeply when they're not met. Let me tell you a story about Mrs. Helen, a retired nurse in her early 70s. Helen had 2 children, David and Emma, who were once her whole world. She worked double shifts, made countless sacrifices to ensure they had a good life, and never complained. After her husband passed, she expected her children would naturally take on a more active role in her life. She imagined weekly phone calls, surprise visits, and family dinners. But none of that happened. David was busy with his career, constantly traveling for work. Emma was overwhelmed with her own family, soccer practices, school projects, and juggling her job. Helen waited by the phone, checking it constantly, convinced that any minute it would ring. But days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The loneliness grew unbearable. One day, after yet another missed call from David, she felt something snap inside her. She thought about calling him and saying, "Do you even care about me anymore?" But instead, she did something unexpected. She stopped waiting. Helen made a bold decision. If they wouldn't come to her, she'd start living for herself. She signed up for a local painting class, something she hadn't done since her youth. At first, it felt awkward. She was the oldest one in the room and hadn't picked up a brush in decades. But slowly, she found her rhythm. Weeks later, Helen's energy began to change. Her house was filled with vibrant canvases, and she made friends at the art studio. She even participated in a local art fair and sold a few paintings. Her joy was contagious. Then something surprising happened. Emma called one afternoon and said, "Mom, you sound different lately. Happier. What's going on?" Helen simply replied, "I've been busy painting. It feels good to create something again." That one phone call led to another, and soon, Emma was visiting more often, this time not out of guilt, but because she admired her mother's newfound passion. Helen's change in energy drew her children back into her life in ways she never expected. Now you might be thinking, that sounds nice, but does it really work for everyone? The truth is, when you stop chasing their attention and start focusing on your own joy, something remarkable happens. You become magnetic. People, your children included, are drawn to confidence, happiness, and independence. But here's the twist. This isn't about manipulation or playing games. It's about rediscovering yourself. Remember, you're not just a parent. You're a person with passions, talents, and dreams that deserve to be nurtured. Ask yourself, when was the last time you did something just for you? Take Mr. Lorenzo, for example. He used to spend all his time waiting for his adult children to visit, often feeling disappointed when they didn't. One day, instead of waiting, he joined a hiking group for seniors. At first, his children teased him, saying, "Dad, you're too old for this." But soon they noticed how energized and happy he seemed. His newfound independence inspired them. They started visiting more often, not because he asked them to, but because they genuinely enjoyed his company again. Here's the hard truth. When you center your entire life around waiting for your children, you unintentionally create pressure they often don't know how to respond to. But when you live your life fully, something shifts. You're no longer just their parent. You become someone they admire. So, what can you do right now to spark that change? You don't have to take up painting or hiking if that's not your thing. It could be gardening, volunteering, learning to cook something new, or joining a book club. The point is to start living for yourself. Now, take a moment and ask yourself, If I started focusing on my own happiness today, what would that look like? It's not selfish. It's necessary. Your life is still yours to live, vibrantly and fully. And when you do that, you just might find your children drawn back into your world in ways you never imagined. When your child speaks harshly or ignores you, the first instinct is often to react, to lash out with words like, "After everything I've done for you, how can you treat me like this?" It's natural. You're hurt, and hurt demands an outlet. But here's the hard truth: reacting in anger rarely makes things better. Take the story of Mr. Tanaka, a retired schoolteacher. He hadn't spoken to his son in months, and every unanswered call felt like another dagger in his heart. One evening, after yet another failed attempt to connect, his anger boiled over. He picked up the phone, ready to shout, "Do you even care about me anymore?" But then something stopped him. Instead of dialing, Mr. Tanaka took a walk in the park near his home, a habit he hadn't done in years. As he walked, he thought about the sacrifices he had made, the family vacations, and all the nights he worked late to give his children a better life. Slowly, his anger began to fade. Then a surprising thought crossed his mind: is my worth really tied to how often they call me? That realization hit him like a lightning bolt. His dignity, his self-worth, it wasn't something his children could give or take away. The next day, instead of confronting his son, Mr. Tanaka wrote him a letter. No accusations, no guilt trips, just a heartfelt note saying, "I'm thinking of you. I miss you. No matter what, I'll always be here." A week later, his son called back, soft, apologetic, and ready to reconnect. Here's the twist: sometimes the problem isn't their distance, it's our unspoken expectations. We expect them to act a certain way, and when they don't, we feel betrayed. But what if we paused and reflected first? What if we found peace within ourselves before asking for it from others? This isn't about suppressing your emotions. It's about taking control of them. Because when you approach your children calmly and with love, something powerful happens. The doors to communication start opening again. So here's a challenge for you. The next time you feel disrespected or ignored, pause. Take a breath. Reflect. Write your feelings down if you need to, but don't act out in the heat of the moment. Sometimes silence and reflection speak louder than any words ever could. Here's a tough question. What if your children never change? What if they never call as often as you'd like? It's a hard reality to accept, but here's the good news. Your happiness doesn't have to depend on their actions. Let me tell you about Mrs. Elena, a widow in her late 60s. After her husband passed, her home became eerily quiet. At first, she thought the silence wouldn't last. Her children would surely check in more often, right? But as days turned into months, the only sound in her house was the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. Elena fell into a cycle of waiting. Every evening, she sat by the phone, holding her breath whenever it rang, only to feel her heart sink when it wasn't one of her children. She started telling herself stories like, maybe they've forgotten about me, or worse, maybe they don't love me anymore. Then one morning, something inside her shifted. Standing in her kitchen, holding a cold cup of coffee, she thought, I can't live like this anymore. She opened her cupboard, found an old packet of vegetable seeds, and decided to plant a small garden. At first, it was just a way to pass the time. But soon, that little garden grew into a passion. She discovered peace in the soil, the joy of watching something she nurtured bloom. It wasn't long before her backyard became a vibrant haven of flowers and vegetables. The neighbors started noticing and stopped by to admire her work. But here's the twist. As Elena found joy in her garden, her energy changed. She became happier, lighter, more alive. Then something unexpected happened. Her daughter called, not out of obligation, but out of genuine curiosity. Mom, you sound so happy these days. What's your secret? Elena simply smiled and said, I've been busy taking care of my garden. It feels good to create something for myself again. That one phone call turned into another, and soon her daughter was visiting every weekend, not out of guilt, but because she admired her mother's new sense of purpose. Here's the truth. When you start living for yourself, you stop radiating sadness and loneliness. Instead, you become magnetic. People, even your children, are drawn to the energy of someone who is fulfilled and passionate. So what could that be for you? Maybe it's not gardening. It could be painting, learning to play an instrument, or volunteering at a local community center. The specific activity doesn't matter. What matters is finding something that lights you up. Because when you rebuild your life, you don't just rediscover who you are, you show your children what it means to live fully. And that kind of example is hard to ignore. Here's a question for you. What's one thing you've always wanted to do but never made time for? Maybe now is the time to start. And remember, rebuilding your life isn't about leaving your family behind. It's about creating a version of yourself that's so vibrant, they'll want to be part of your journey, not because they feel obligated, but because they truly want to. Here's a tough question. What if your children never change? What if they never call as often as you'd like? It's a hard reality to accept, but here's the good news. Your happiness doesn't have to depend on their actions. Let me tell you about Mrs. Elena, a widow in her late 60s. After her husband passed, her home became eerily quiet. At first, she thought the silence wouldn't last. Her children would surely check in more often, right? But as days turned into months, the only sound in her house was the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. Elena fell into a cycle of waiting. Every evening, she sat by the phone, holding her breath whenever it rang, only to feel her heart sink when it wasn't one of her children. She started telling herself stories like, maybe they've forgotten about me, or worse, maybe they don't love me anymore. Then one morning, something inside her shifted. Standing in her kitchen, holding a cold cup of coffee, she thought, I can't live like this anymore. She opened her cupboard, found an old packet of vegetable seeds, and decided to plant a small garden. At first, it was just a way to pass the time. But soon, that little garden grew into a passion. She discovered peace in the soil, the joy of watching something she nurtured bloom. It wasn't long before her backyard became a vibrant haven of flowers and vegetables. The neighbors started noticing and stopped by to admire her work. But here's the twist. As Elena found joy in her garden, her energy changed. She became happier, lighter, more alive. Then something unexpected happened. Her daughter called, not out of obligation, but out of genuine curiosity. Mom, you sound so happy these days. What's your secret? Elena simply smiled and said, I've been busy taking care of my garden. It feels good to create something for myself again. That one phone call turned into another, and soon her daughter was visiting every weekend, not out of guilt, but because she admired her mother's new sense of purpose. Here's the truth. When you start living for yourself, you stop radiating sadness and loneliness. Instead, you become magnetic. People, even your children, are drawn to the energy of someone who is fulfilled and passionate. So what could that be for you? Maybe it's not gardening. It could be painting, learning to play an instrument, or volunteering at a local community center. The specific activity doesn't matter. What matters is finding something that lights you up. Because when you rebuild your life, you don't just rediscover who you are, you show your children what it means to live fully. And that kind of example is hard to ignore. Here's a question for you. What's one thing you've always wanted to do but never made time for? Maybe now is the time to start. And remember, rebuilding your life isn't about leaving your family behind. It's about creating a version of yourself that's so vibrant, they'll want to be part of your journey, not because they feel obligated, but because they truly want to. When was the last time you truly told your children how you feel? Not in frustration or disappointment, but with kindness and vulnerability? The truth is, many parents expect their children to just know how hurt they are. But the reality? Most of them have no idea. Now, you might be thinking, why should I be the one to reach out? Shouldn't they realize how distant they've become? And that's a fair question. But here's the twist. Waiting for them to make the first move might leave you waiting forever. Take the story of Mr. Peterson, a retired carpenter. He hadn't heard from his son James in months. Every day he sat by the window watching for James' car to pull into the driveway. The longer he waited, the deeper his hurt grew. At one point, he felt ready to call James and say, "Why don't you ever call me? Don't you care about me at all?" But something stopped him. He knew that anger would only push James further away. So instead, he sat down at his kitchen table and wrote James a letter. Not a long one, but an honest one. In the letter, he didn't blame or guilt his son. He simply wrote, James, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I miss our conversations. I miss hearing about your life. I just want you to know that I'm always here for you and I'm proud of you no matter what. A few days later, his phone rang. It was James. The letter had touched him deeply. He confessed that he'd been caught up with work and family but had no idea how much his absence hurt his father. That one letter reopened a door that had been shut for years. Here's what most people don't realize. Harsh words build walls, but honest vulnerability builds bridges. When you communicate your feelings wisely, without blame, without anger, you create an opportunity for connection. It's not about suppressing your emotions. It's about delivering them with care. For example, instead of saying, "You never call me," try saying, "I miss hearing your voice." Instead of asking, "Why are you always too busy for me?" say, "I've been thinking about you a lot lately and just wanted to catch up." The key is this: gentle honesty invites conversation, while harsh accusations push people away. Here's another surprising truth. Sometimes your children aren't being distant because they don't care. It could be guilt. Maybe they know they've been neglectful and don't know how to bridge the gap. So what's the takeaway? Don't wait for your children to guess how you feel. Tell them, not with blame but with love. And don't underestimate the power of a handwritten letter. Sometimes written words can say things your voice struggles to express. Here's a question for you. What would you say to your children if you could express yourself freely, without anger, without blame? Maybe today is the day to write that letter. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to sacrifice your own well-being for the sake of keeping the peace with your children? You say yes to every request because it feels like the loving thing to do. But what happens when those little favors begin to pile up and turn into expectations? Mrs. Rosa, a retired nurse in her 70s, found herself in exactly that situation. At first, helping her son Daniel felt natural. He needed her to babysit the kids occasionally, and she was happy to be part of their lives. But over time, his requests became more frequent and more demanding. He'd show up unannounced, drop off the kids without asking, and disappear for hours. There were no thank yous, no signs of appreciation, just an endless stream of demands. Rosa convinced herself that if she kept helping, he'd eventually realize how much she was doing for him and start showing her the respect she deserved. But it never happened. Each favor only led to more requests, and each yes chipped away at her sense of self. One evening, after another exhausting day of last-minute babysitting, Rosa sat down in her living room and stared at the clock. It struck her, I've been waiting for him to respect me, but how can he if I don't respect myself? The next time Daniel called, asking for her help at the last minute, Rosa did something she'd never done before. She calmly said, I love you, but I'm not available today. I've made plans for myself. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Daniel was surprised, almost offended. Plans? What kind of plans? He asked. Rosa didn't waver. They're my plans and they're important to me. At first, Daniel didn't understand. He even seemed irritated. But Rosa stood her ground. She kept saying no when it was necessary, not out of spite, but because she realized her time and well-being mattered too. Here's the twist. Instead of driving a wedge between them, her boundaries changed their relationship for the better. Daniel started asking before dropping by. He made sure to call ahead and even began thanking her more often. Rosa's relationship with him didn't fall apart. It grew stronger, built on mutual respect rather than unspoken resentment. The truth is, setting boundaries isn't about being harsh or distant. It's about valuing yourself enough to say, I matter too. It may be uncomfortable at first, and your children might not like it right away. But over time they'll adjust. And more importantly, you'll start to feel lighter, freer, and more at peace with your choices. Remember, boundaries are not walls meant to shut others out. They're doors with locks, allowing you to decide when and how you engage with the people you love. When you set those boundaries, you're teaching others how to treat you while reminding yourself that your needs are just as important as theirs. In the end, true respect is mutual. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is show your children how to respect you, by respecting yourself first. It's easy to expect respect from others, especially from your children. After all, you've earned it through years of sacrifice and unconditional love. But here's a hard truth. Respect isn't something you can demand, it's something you inspire through your actions. Mr. Lorenzo, a retired factory worker, knew this lesson well. As his children grew older, their visits became less frequent. When they did visit, they were often distracted, eyes glued to their phones, conversations rushed. Lorenzo was tempted to say something, to remind them how little time they had left together. But he chose a different path. Instead of criticizing or demanding their attention, Lorenzo decided to focus on what he could control: his own behavior. When his children visited, he welcomed them warmly. He listened intently, asked about their lives, and avoided any remarks that might sound like a guilt trip. He treated them the way he wished to be treated, with kindness, patience, and understanding. Even when his birthday came and went without a single call, Lorenzo didn't let it harden his heart. He simply sent a gentle message: "Hope you're all doing well. I miss you." Here's the twist. Over time, his consistent warmth and grace started to have an effect. His children began visiting more often, not because they felt guilty, but because they genuinely enjoyed being around him. They saw their father not as someone waiting for their attention, but as a man who carried himself with quiet dignity and unwavering love. Leading by example isn't about being passive or letting things slide. It's about showing others how to treat you through your own actions. When you consistently treat your children with respect and kindness, even when they fall short, you plant a seed. It may not grow overnight, but given time, that seed can change the way they see and treat you. Think about this. If your children were to mirror your current behavior, how would they treat you? This isn't about blaming yourself. It's about realizing the power you have to shape your relationships by embodying the values you want to see. Mr. Lorenzo's story proves that respect is contagious. By showing his children what respect looked like, he gave them the opportunity to reflect and grow. Eventually, they began to mirror his behavior. So, what can you do today to lead by example? It could be as simple as showing gratitude for the small things, staying calm during difficult conversations, or being the first to apologize when things go wrong. These small actions have a big impact. And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about being consistent. In time, your quiet strength will speak louder than any words ever could. One of the most powerful ways to maintain respect in your relationship with your children is by staying financially independent. It's easy to believe that your children will naturally support you as you grow older, but the truth is, relying too much on them for financial help can create tension, even resentment. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, a retired couple in their 70s, understood this well. After retiring, they decided to downsize their home and simplify their lifestyle to ensure they could live comfortably on their savings. It wasn't always easy, but they managed their finances carefully, refusing to become a financial burden on their children. At first, their children didn't fully understand their choices. But over time, they came to admire their parents' independence. They sought advice on budgeting and retirement planning, respecting their parents not only for their wisdom but for their strength in managing their own lives. Here's the key: financial independence isn't about refusing help when you truly need it. It's about taking control of your life and showing your children that you're capable of standing strong. When your children see that you're self-reliant, they'll respect you even more, not because you asked for it, but because you earned it. Forgiveness is one of the hardest things to offer, especially when it comes to your children. When they hurt you, whether through neglect or disrespect, it's easy to carry that pain. But holding on to resentment only weighs you down. Mrs. Evelyn, a retired artist, spent years feeling abandoned by her daughter Claire. One day, she decided to write Claire a letter saying, "I forgive you for the distance between us, but I'll never forget my own worth." After that, Evelyn picked up her paintbrushes again and found joy in painting, something she hadn't done in years. Months later, Claire visited unexpectedly. Seeing her mother happy and fulfilled left her speechless. That visit became a turning point in their relationship, not because Evelyn waited for Claire's approval, but because she reclaimed her dignity and refused to let anyone define her value. Forgive but never forget who you are. Your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. It's something you carry within yourself. Loneliness is one of the most painful experiences as we age, especially when our children grow distant. The key to overcoming it is building new relationships outside your family. Mr. Harold, a widower in his 80s, spent years waiting for his children to visit. But after joining a local seniors club, everything changed. He made new friends, participated in weekly coffee gatherings, and even started organizing day trips. Harold's life became richer and more fulfilling. He still loved his children, but he no longer relied solely on them for emotional support. And here's the twist. Once Harold found happiness in his new social circle, his children began visiting more often. Why? Because they saw him thriving, not waiting. Building a new circle of companionship won't replace your family, but it will bring you new sources of joy and connection. And in the end, that kind of independence makes your bond with your children even stronger. So what's next? How can you apply these steps to your life starting today? The answer is simple. Take one step at a time. Don't rush. Don't expect instant results. Start by pausing and reflecting when emotions rise. Rebuild your life with a new passion or purpose. Communicate your feelings wisely. Set healthy boundaries, and most importantly, take control of your happiness. Your life isn't over just because your children have grown distant. It's a new chapter, one where you get to focus on you. And here's the secret. When you live fully, your energy becomes irresistible. Your children will notice. They'll be drawn back into your life, not because you demand it, but because they'll be inspired by your strength. If you're ready to take that step, comment below with a 9. If you're still reflecting, comment with a 0. Either way, remember, your worth is timeless and your story is far from over.